Well, I just wanted to share that I joined because I think in my heart I've always wanted to understand the Quran on a deeper level. And I kind of wanted to go through the Quran the way I might do a book in a literature class, and not just for my own understanding, to understand my deen better. But I think living in this country and dealing with Islamophobia, I feel almost like it's my, I guess, my duty, my obligation to understand what the Quran is really saying, so that people put out, um, when people put out something that's not true, I have at least a little bit of basic knowledge to counteract a discussion like that, rather than just in my heart feeling like, oh, like that's not good. The Quran says that, or Muslims believe this. And the more that I'm reading, the more that I'm understanding, I'm really seeing what a beautiful, mashallah, beautiful religion that we're blessed with if you choose this path. And I'm really grateful for this course and for it's been an amazing experience for me. Alhamdulillah. I'm loving it. Thank you so much.
Yay! That's great to hear. Looks like it's working so far. Yeah, some of you know my origin story. I had been trained in how to recite in Arabic, called Arabic tajweed. There's all these like really complicated rules. I had perfect pronunciation, 4 different Quran tutors growing up, but it wasn't until I picked up an English translation of the Quran and read it for myself that I fell in love with Islam on a whole deeper level, and that I really understood what a gift this religion is. And it was after 9/11. It was after seeing all of the misinformation and the claims against our community in the media. And I wanted to see, is it actually true? And so, yeah, that makes me really happy to hear, Rabia, that, we inherently know, because we know so many Muslims, we know that these are good people, and it can be very conflicting to see how we're portrayed. So it makes me very happy to hear that you're seeing for yourself what a beautiful religion this is when it is actually learned, and people are empowered that way.
I have been born in a Muslim family and I was reading Quran for a long time. And sometimes I would try to learn the meaning of small surahs, but I never had the discipline to, completely understand the meaning of all of Quran. So I thought this was a good opportunity, and that's why I joined. And I'm glad I did, because now I have the Quran, and I'm trying to do the homework. I'm behind on that, but I also try to read the short verses that I use in my namaz, and it's good to know the meaning. And in many of the verses, it means different from what I had thought initially, just reading the basic translation. So, and it has helped me, because it kind of aligns more to my other, scientific and rational mind better. Um, so I feel really good about that.
I would love to hear an example of one of those verses.
Yeah. So um, in this is not something that we have covered in the homework, but in Qul A'udhu bi Rabbil Falaq, min sharri ma khalaq, min sharri ghasikin idha waqab. So it talks about, at the surface level, the way I was taught, it was save me from witchcraft. And when I, like it's hard to kind of think about witchcraft and see that that's a powerful thing that we need to be saved against. But when I read the meaning in the Quran that we are using it for our homework, it says, witchcraft is irrational, and the safety that we desire is putting our faith in the irrational. And then even the last one, which is وَمِن شَرِّ حَاسِدٍ إِذَا حَسَدَ, it is about people who are feeling ill about you, and save me from them. And that also kind of, I didn't really think, before that how is that powerful if somebody is feeling jealous towards us. But in this version of the Quran, it talks about how that person who is feeling jealousy is actually doing themselves harm. So it has a different meaning from what I thought it meant. And that um, made more sense to me, in my other life. So that's just one example, but there are several others.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's great to hear that, you're finally coming to a holistic appreciation of the Quran where you can feel like a whole person, right? One of the things that we've always strived, one of those, in our mosque is that people, American Muslims, especially American Muslim youth, which we have in our circle today, Assalamu alaikum, Sakina. She's called our adhan before, done a great job, is that there is no conflict between being 100% American and 100% Muslim. And again, this is something we feel in our souls, but when we watch the media, we might be misled to believe otherwise. So it's great to hear that you're being able to see for yourself by reading the Quran that these things are one and the same, just being a good human. And today we had 3 highly voted topics or highly voted questions. So the number one question that people wanted to discuss was, what are your beliefs on how prayers affect the physical world, and how do you think prayers function? The other question was, how do we strike a balance between taking action and having faith in God? And the third one was, God tells us in the Quran that we need to change ourselves first in order to change our circumstances. So what collective changes does the Muslim Ummah need to make in order to change our condition worldwide?
Since one of the questions was like, how do you think prayer functions in the real world? I think that's definitely a multifaceted thing, how prayer works. I mean, for one thing, I feel like prayer in many ways can sometimes work to soften one's own heart and to make one better at persevering and making the best of a situation, right? I feel like that's maybe one of those things that I mean, we can see how that is a benefit that we gain from a lot of spiritual practices. However, I really do believe in miracles, and so I do feel like there are instances where God can intervene and wow us and do things that are just other, I don't know, just inexplicable, right?
On that day of the curriculum, there's actually a little video in there if you guys want to watch it. The Rene Pioch, or Pioch, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but a French scientist who did these experiments on, they called it telekinesis or intention, but essentially it's prayer. And he did this really interesting experiment on these baby chicks. So baby chicks or baby birds, once they're hatched, they attach to the first thing that's moving around them as their mother. And so he conditioned these baby chicks to basically attach to this robot that randomly moves around as their mother. And he tested out if he puts the baby chicks in a cage and has this randomized robot right next to it, does their essentially prayer and intention and wanting to pull the robot, quote unquote, mom closer to them, does it have any effect on this inanimate object that's randomly moving around? And I think it was 70% of the time the robot moved closer to the baby chicks. So it's really wild. If you watch the video, you can see for yourself. And then he has the randomized study as well. I've linked to both in the curriculum. But yeah, there's, these are things that are being done in different pockets, in different communities. And it would be great to see these types of experiments replicated. But I think so far he's done the experiment thousands of times and has gotten the same results over and over.
Prayer, for me, kind of clarifies what is most important to me, what I feel. And what I feel the outcome to be. In a way, it's kind of clarification thing in my mind. How does it really come to fruition. I'm not sure, but I feel of it like a bank account where you kind of keep on putting money in, and then maybe one day it will, something will come out of it.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I just joined the program, by the way, a few weeks ago. It's nice to meet you all virtually. So I'm still in Surah Al-Baqarah, and I had some just like reflections from some of the verses that I was reading. First off, just on like favorite verses, I put mine in the chat, but there's honestly just some verses that just kind of floor you with how beautiful they are. And I felt that way as I was reading it. And I'm reading it. I know that I didn't recommend to like read it online, but I've been reading it online just so I can play it simultaneously and hear it. And I feel like that really helps me. What I really liked about what I've read so far is this theme of like, why did Allah put humans on earth? And we get to be privy to a conversation between Allah and the angels as to why humans were created. So I think this kind of relates to your question around what changes do we have to make before our circumstances change? And like, there's a conversation between Allah and the angels where it's like, why did you put upon earth those who would cause corruption and shed blood on the earth? And then Allah says, like, I know that which you do not know. And so I think about that a lot and just about what role were humans placed upon to be on this earth. And I think something that's really powerful from a lot of the verses I've read is that the Qur'an really plays with this binary structure. It's often talking about sort of like those who have been guided aright versus those who have been guided astray. And I think it plays with it really powerfully, and I always take note of it. I think something that I struggled with when I was growing up and reading the Qur'an was like, sometimes I felt like, okay, like I feel like I'm like right in between. I don't necessarily feel like I'm like rightly guided, nor do I feel like I've gone astray or are of the rebellious ones, or it's phrased in different ways in different verses. So that is something that I still kind of currently struggle with, because I feel like it does kind of there's so many verses that sort of place people in one of two camps. And so that's just something I think about as I read. And then my other reflection is that it uses this iterative kind of structure around like those who are misguided are deaf, dumb, and blind. And there's another verse that says, if God so willed, he could take away their hearing and their sight. And I think what struck me about that is because I've been like learning more about sort of like disability justice. I would be curious to hear those verses from like a disability justice lens, because there are people in our community among us who are blind or vision impaired or hearing impaired. And I'm just curious sort of how that plays into the dynamic.
Well, I have a question for you. So do you, when you hear those, the calls and the categories of, these are people you want to be like, these are people you don't want to be like, do you at all feel motivation to go in one direction or to run away from another direction? Because that's how I've experienced it is, even if I am going in one direction and it's a positive one, when I see those reminders, it reinforces that path of like the reminder of this is something I want to avoid and this is where I want to go. So, I'm just curious to see how it plays with your motivation when you read those verses.
I definitely feel like it's like aspirational. It's like a verse for guidance. I definitely feel like I want to be among those who are led on the straight path. And sometimes like I took notes on a few verses I read that really sort of struck me to that effect. I think there was one that said they have traded guidance for misguidance, but it is profitless. And I thought that was really powerful to think about, like, because there's so many people and we've seen them all around who have taken on something that is misguidance that they've traded for guidance. And to them, they think they're making a profit. But here in this verse, it says it is profitless. And so, yes, definitely reading that, I feel like I want to be among that group.
We've got these senses. We've got 5 senses that we're told about in the model world. There's, so much more than that. There's a spiritual sense and other things as well. But it kind of like puts you in check that you've been blessed with these. There's people who don't have these senses, but you've been blessed with these and you're not seeing the truth or following the truth. You're hearing it, but you're not acting upon it. So again, it's just like a reminder to be grateful and use the gifts you've got as well. Like use those senses, you could do so much more with them. That's how I interpret that. And yeah, I work with a lot of deaf people as part of my job. And again, yeah, I've seen what people can lose or if they're born like that. And again, it's just a check-in, be grateful. It's probably digressing a little bit, but I did work with a young Muslim kid who was probably around 12 years at the time. He was born deaf. He got cochlear implants, which help you hear. So with the help of cochlear implants, he was able to actually function in a mainstream school. And I think he got those when he was 2 years old. And he did really well. He was like the all-star kid in school, really good at football, or soccer as you call it here. He was, getting the best grades. He was a good kid at home. He was going to the masjid, he was top of everything, doing really well considering, he had this disability. And when he came to the clinic, one of the things we found out is that he did have something called Usher's syndrome, which is where he was progressively going to start to go blind. And it got to a point, and I had seen him for many years, and then I saw this kid is no longer going to be able to do his sports or just function in the main world. And again, he actually eventually lost his eyesight, but just before he's lost his eyesight fully, his biggest wish was, Mom, I want to go to Hajj. So she made it happen. That's what his big wish was. He wanted to see that. And I'm sharing that because, deaf, dumb, and blind came up. So he didn't have a sense. He then got a sense, and then he lost that sense of sight. He still has his hearing, though. And, again, it just kind of makes you feel that we're so blessed and we could do so much with what we got. And sometimes you just got to, use what you've got in the best way.
I think about deaf with lowercase d and deaf with a capital D. It's the idea of being part of the deaf community with a capital D is being part of a community of people with a rich language of, if you're in America, ASL, American Sign Language. If you're in Britain, BSL, British Sign Language. So you often think of deaf with a lowercase d, meaning the lack of something, and looking at it from a disability justice point of view flips that on its head. So it's, you don't not have access to language. You do have access to language. It's not in the way that that someone who hasn't been deaf may think of it. But if you look at the linguistic structure of ASL, it has all the pieces of a full language structure, grammar, syntax, all of that. So then taking that, thinking of people from the deaf, capital D community, and comparing that to what the Qur'an says about deaf, dumb, and blind. And I'm looking at the surah from Baqarah, 171 in Baqarah. It says, the example of the disbelievers not responding to the messenger's warning is like a flock not comprehending the calls and cries of the shepherd. They are willfully deaf, dumb, and blind, so they have no understanding. So in that case, I think the Quran is playing with this concept of deaf, dumb, and blind, because if you think of someone from the deaf community who has full access to language, who has full access to community, you could not put that person in this description of not comprehending calls of their shepherd. You couldn't put that person in this definition of having no understanding. And so if we kind of think a little deeper about it, being willfully lowercase deaf, dumb, and blind means you're willfully choosing to take something away from yourself for understanding, as opposed to you're born without something, or if something happens and you don't have a sense, but you're able to develop full understanding through other means, such as ASL, or if you're blind through Braille. So it was interesting to me that that was what was surrounding that verse about comprehension and understanding. Because if you are deaf, dumb, and blind, that doesn't mean you don't have comprehension or understanding. So I think the Quran is talking about something else. It's somebody who is making a choice to cut off understanding and comprehension, not necessarily cut off those senses.
Great reflection. Yeah, and early on in the curriculum, you'll see there's a whole section on allegory in the Quran and how God will play with metaphors, analogies, verses that should be taken literally and verses that should be taken in a multidimensional way. So it really is a timeless book, a timeless message for all people of all times, all cultures, all ability levels, and in that way, it's a lasting message for all of humanity.
And so if we take that one step further, then you have, you go further than to say the thought of, oh, I feel so bad for this person because they are deaf or dumb or, or they're blind. Where actually we should feel bad for the ones who have cut themselves off from understanding, not from those who have for some kind of disability. So that is where my mind goes.
I was just telling Leila I appreciated the question. I hadn't considered that lens of disability justice when reading the verses that she mentioned, but what comes to mind for me is similar to what our last speaker said, like the difference between physical disability and spiritual deficiency. And I say deficiency because it's something that can be built up, it's with practice as far as like our, just spiritual muscle and practice. There we go. That's where our level of practice can build our spiritual capacity. I was saying there are those who I've personally met who are quote unquote disabled in some sense, but are regarded as like spiritual giants. And so maybe what's being like called out is like our overemphasis on like what is physical and what's quote unquote material, real, and what makes us big and strong. But we should be relying on God who's really big and strong and building our spiritual capacity. So that's it. That's what came to mind for me.
Yeah, I had a fun experience at the car repair shop yesterday. They're Muslim brothers who own this car repair shop. And so the owner is like this really hilarious man with a very strong personality. He's always like, every time I come in, he's trying to compete with me. He's like, oh, what do you think about men and women, this and that? And his brother works with him. And I don't think they're super practicing, but we haven't really talked too much about religion before. But yesterday, was it yesterday? Yeah, I think it was yesterday. Essentially, he was conceding to the last argument that we had or debate that we had. And as I was signing, the paperwork, he was like, what is your education? That was his way of being like, how do you think this way? And I was like, oh, my education is the Quran. And then he brought his brother and he was like, come back, because his brother was about to leave. And then he went on to say like, oh yeah, my brother is, studies the Quran. And his brother, these are like two older Jordanian men. His brother, every time I come in, is like such a gentle spirit, always like winking, like whenever, the two of us are getting into our fun arguments and debates. And I was like, oh, that makes total sense. Yeah. When I look at him, I see the character of the Quran. When I look at you, I see the character of Hadith and culture. And then this is like our fun banter that we have back and forth. So, and he was like, oh, you're like my daughter or whatever. And so when I was leaving, he was like, in 15 years, this is the first time anyone has ever said something about my brother and how special he is. And I was like, yeah, you need to elevate him, right? But like, how many people are there like that who have this jewel of a character who go quietly unseen in the background, where the person who's making, running the shots or, leading the show, maybe they're a good person, but in God's eyes, are the ranks that we as humans give other humans the same as the ranks that we each hold in God's eyes? Usually it's, the opposite. We know that children are the closest to God, right? We're all born pure with pure souls and a pure fitra. And it's only as we get older that we unlearn our natural pure state. So just a fun example. It's the best rates in town, honest businessman. So I go there and then he likes to pick arguments with me, and I tell him, you can't win. I already won. I was curious to know, so I'm going to actually pick one of my favorite questions, because I would like to find out what people believe. So we covered in this past month Noah's Ark, and talked a little bit about it, or one of the verses was touching in on it. So one of the questions in the curriculum was, do you believe that Noah's Ark was a literal ship or a metaphor for something else? And do you believe that it was a global or a local flood? So I'd like to just find out from people, what are your guys' beliefs on Noah's Ark? Do you think it was a literal ship? Do you think that, I think one of the questions too was, do you think Noah's community was modern Homo sapiens? And do you think it was a global flood or a local flood? And in the reading in Muhammad Assad's footnotes, he says, or he believes that it was a local flood in the Mediterranean basin.
I think is real. I know a lot of people I need to believe in miracles, I feel, and so I think that that's real. I know a lot of people need to believe in something more tangible, and so they think it's a metaphor. So I believe that it was real. As far as local versus worldwide, I don't know. I feel like that's something I really need to think about more, and I never thought of that part of it. I guess I just assumed it was, in my mind, that was the world. Like, his community was the world. But I guess, yeah, it probably, I know it's just in that area, the local, where the mountain, what's that, Mount Jude? Is it Mount Jude? Where they say that Noah's Ark landed probably, or ended up probably. Yeah. But I always thought of that being the world. Like, that was where things were happening. That was where humanity was at the time.
I remember in 8th grade, one of my friends, I think his name was Robbie, he came up to me and he was like, I feel sorry for you. And I was like, why? He's like, they found Noah's Ark. And I was like, I believe in Noah's Ark. Okay. And then he was like, oh, and then he went away. But yeah, it's a fun one. There's a lot of fun scientific miracles that are talked about in the Quran. And we'll get into more of them as we go through the text. Samira, do you want to, other online Samira, not in-person Samira, do you want to share?
Oh, you could read it. It was just really short. I was just saying that I'd always imagined that it was a real, like, global flood. But like the last person, I guess I just imagined, like, when I read the Quran, like, that was the whole world. You know what I mean? Just by default. I don't really consider what was going on in other places.
What would the implication be? How does it shift the meaning?
That's a good point. Yeah.
I'm just curious. Did you have like?
No. I think that's one of the verses that Muhammad Assad takes literally. He does tend to read a lot of more into allegory, but that's one of the ones he takes literally. But he takes it as a local flood. Just in that region, the Mediterranean. When you see the water and the way that it goes inland into the Mediterranean basin, he believes that was the flood that came in and wiped out the people there. But that's a good point, right? It's the same lessons that we would learn regardless. And I think that's something that is maybe unique to how Muslims deal with all of the scientific miracles in the Quran. As opposed to other religions, is that we do tend to focus on the lesson, and also because the Quran is different in that way. It doesn't have as much detail as the Bible or the Torah. All right. And I'd love to hear from people, if this is your first time reading the Quran, it's always exciting to hear from people, who are opening it up for the first time and discovering new things. So I'd love to hear from you guys as well. online or in person. Any topic. So we could even talk about how do we strike a balance between taking action and having faith. So one of the famous hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is that a man came to him and said, do I tie my camel, to prevent it from roaming around, or do I set it free and trust in God? And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, responded, you tie your camel and you have trust in God. So we do both. But it's always interesting to hear, how people in their everyday lives, how does that actually play out? How do you strike that balance between taking action, knowing maybe when to change course of action, knowing when to stop, knowing to start, and having faith?
It's hard to do both. So tie your camel, try to get something right, and then pray about it, ask Allah with istikhara or with prayer, with dua, and ask for protection. And then whatever happens, throw caution to the wind. It's really hard to see results, but it's the way it goes.
Yeah, I like that. You're basically making a distinction between effort and the end result.
I'll say two things from my own practice. So earlier on in life, I had, made some bets and kind of done things, and I had asked Allah for help. This is what I want to do, and help me achieve that. And those things have come to pass, and then I kind of realized that was not really right for me. So now I pray to Allah that whatever is in best interest of me, please do that when I'm not sure what I should do. So that's one. And the second thing is when I pray in namaz, in Alhamdulillah, when it says Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, Ihdina siratal mustaqim, the straight path, I can try to relate to what dilemma I'm going through, and I ask for guidance, in that let me kind of think the right way about this thing. So it might not be exactly what it's supposed to mean, but that's how I've been using it in my own kind of spiritual practice.
That's a really great point, right? Like sometimes we could be taking the right action in the wrong way. And that's a really good point you make about, we want to be guided by God. Even as we're taking good steps towards something that's good, there's a right and a wrong way to do it, to go about it. Are we forcing it with our own self-will, thinking that we're the ones who are making it happen, or do we truly have that understanding that everything happens with God's permission alone?
There's two different ayahs in different parts of the Quran. I think the first one is in Surah Nisa that we read regarding like faith and action. And I remember, because I'm just thinking about it, I went back to it because everything that's happening with Palestine and just like the different type of like organizing strategies that people are deploying. And it says there, the ayah is like, don't think that you'll enter Jannah without striving. Like you won't be tested like those who came before you. And there's another ayah, is it Ali Imran or is it Nisa? I think maybe it's Nisa. What's wrong with you for being passive and not taking action? So there's such a strong emphasis. Allah constantly says that you have to take action, right? It's not enough just to be hopeful and have prayer. You have to take action, right? And it's the whole thing is that it's take the step, do the effort, don't worry about the outcome. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is responsible for the outcome. We're not responsible for that. And that actually takes some of the burden off, right? And it's not saying that you just do things like willy-nilly and you don't plan, you don't think, you don't have, you don't do your due diligence, but it's that we're not responsible for the outcome. What we're responsible for is the effort. And then like my son, he had Sunday school this morning. Yesterday we were reviewing, he's going over Surah Al-Ma'un about, the orphan and the small acts of kindness, right? And it says in that surah, it's like, okay, like you pray, but you don't feed the poor, you don't take care of the orphan. Like that's
that's not enough, right? So just being prayerful and just saying that, like, that's your faith, like, that's actually not enough. You actually have to do the work. I think that's like in Islam, it's that duality. You have to do prayer and action, and it's not one versus the other, right? You have to do both, and doing just one and not doing the other is not sufficient. So I've just been reflecting on that a lot.
Yeah, it's I feel like we're always being called to be whole. And it's interesting, looking at a lot of secular movements for justice in the US. I had like an insider look at that, starting the women's mosque, and it attracted, I wouldn't say just two camps of people, but it definitely attracted those who were coming back to Islam or interested in Islam. And it also attracted people who were interested in women's rights and women's empowerment. And of course, there was an overlap of both. But yeah, I definitely see how sometimes if we are divorcing our good actions and our fights for justice from a position of humility and being rooted in the right intention, we can actually cause more harm than good.
I wanted to pick up on what Samira was saying about duality. So in essence, Allah is asking us to do two things, right? Have faith and do good works. As opposed, and it gets me thinking of how Allah is one, but everything else in nature is dual, including the way we seek Allah.
Yeah. Does anyone have that famous poem memorized off the top of their head? Let me see if I can find it. If you know, you know. There are a lot of challenges and difficulties in our world, especially in the Muslim community. And those of us who have maybe grown up Muslim or been part of the Muslim community for a long time know that we have this sort of history of hearing about Muslim suffering around the globe, right? One day it's Bosnia, another day it's Palestine, another day it's Bangladesh, Pakistan. The list goes on about how much Muslims have been suffering around the world for so long. And so the question is, God tells us that we need to change ourselves first in order to change our circumstances. So what collective changes does the Muslim Ummah need to make in order to change our condition worldwide?
I think part of it is starting with your money, and that you really do vote a lot with your dollar, and that if you stop buying Temu and Shein and all these companies that support slave labor, and help your brother or sister whenever they speak about going to get a payday loan, putting their house, putting their car up for a payday loan, and you lend them money instead of having them go to these, I would say, modern day sharecropping organizations. I think that it is just one piece of what can help our Ummah truly. I mean, not buying new technology is another one, buying from used, because if you look at what's in our computers and all of our technology that we have here, it's slave labor again in Muslim countries. So I think just a big part of it is buying used, asking your community, hey, do you have an abaya like this I got from a thrift store? Like, do you have an abaya that I can buy instead of going to Temu or any organization that doesn't do right by its people or pay its workers fairly?
It's a great point, right? It's supply and demand. And remember when the first iPhone came out, or the second one, and people were like, what, a second version? Like, we just had this world-changing technology, and now we're on like version what? And that exponential rise is our hedonic adaptation, right? We talked about that in the beginning verses of Surah Baqarah, and how people become enslaved when they exchange their freedoms for comforts and luxuries. And so it does behoove us, great point, Mariah, that, as Muslims in America, and Muslims everywhere, people everywhere, maybe if we stay in a place of gratitude for what we have, instead of kind of joining the rat race or trying to keep up with with what everyone else has, and buying into that as a marker of success, maybe we keep our focus on God's evaluation of success and our ranking with God.
Yeah, I've reflected on a lot. And just going back to that same ayah, I just keep going, like, you will not enter Jannah unless you sacrifice and you strive, right? And I forgot who was listening. Someone was saying, it's actually a lot. We see like what's happening to our, whether it's in Palestine or any other country that you mentioned, and there's shaheed, like we know like they're guaranteed Jannah, like they already, they suffered incredible violence, but it's like, don't worry about them, worry about your own soul, because it's a lot harder to get into Jannah living in the West because you have so much comfort. And the test for us is like, what are you willing to sacrifice? And what are you actually willing to give up? Because you can have anything you want. Literally, we can have anything we want compared to the rest of the world. And are we sacrificing enough? And I'm constantly thinking, like, what more sacrifice can you give, right? And what things are right in front of you that we're just completely oblivious to, right? There's orphans in our midst that we could be taking care of directly, but that we're almost voluntarily deaf, dumb, and blind to what's right in front of us. So just, I've been reflecting on that too, is that like we're just not, and I think that we're also, it's the fear of losing, like, oh, if I sacrifice this, if I don't give, I'm going to be less off, or, and so that keeps people are they want to hold on to stuff, they want to hoard.
I do want to give a balanced answer. It's difficult, right? It's difficult to, not go on Amazon and just pick out an iPad, for example, or going on eBay or Facebook Marketplace and looking somewhere for a used option, so that you're not contributing to Apple continuing their prospects in Africa. So I just wanted to say that it is difficult, but we can all do it, and we can circulate our dollars within our community, and it would improve our community, so then we could actually give more to our brothers and sisters that are having a hard time.
Totally agree. I think since everything that's been going on lately, I think we've all kind of looked at how we can help in any way we can, whether it's not buying something or giving our money more towards something else. But it's hard living in the West, because it feels like if we as Muslims want to make it and want to eventually be in a position of change, you kind of have to play the game of the rat race. Like, you kind of have to, like, my husband yesterday was like, how would you feel if your son went into politics? I'm like, that's great. He's like, yeah, but to make it that far, to actually make it to where you're at the table, you have to compromise. You have to give up some of your own, ideals. And so it's hard that in the West, like, to create real change sometimes for a large group of people, it seems like you kind of have to give up a little bit of yourself and your beliefs. So I guess that's something that I thought about too.
It's true, and I think what's also true is that you would be surprised at how many people agree with you who are just silent, and they're waiting for someone else to take the first step so that they can join this new burgeoning community. Because I think a lot of people are on the same page of what they believe is equal and just and right. And when no one speaks out against it, or no one takes a stand, kind of the group just keeps flowing as a group. And when you do take a stand, or you say no, or you speak your truth, you will be surprised how many people then start to speak up as well, one by one, and it gains traction. And so kind of bringing it back to one of the first things we talked about, of like the two groups of people, the people who are doing good or the people who are not. I think at any moment in time, we are all either going on that uphill road, or we're going backwards. And if we just stay still, by default, we're going backwards. So we do need to, even a little bit, just keep speaking our truth. And I think you would be surprised, how many people would join your group or join what you're saying if they just heard someone speak up. Any other changes? So you guys know my belief is that we need to become Qur'an literate. Plug for the program that you're already in. But I truly do believe that once Muslims know what Islam actually is, game over. We really can incrementally, as individuals, affect a worldwide ripple of positive change, inshallah, God willing. Anyone else want to talk about things that we can change collectively or even individually to see change in our condition?
So the idea of you have to change internally before you expect external change, to me, speaks to we have to examine our biases before we talk out against this system or that system. And I think one of the places where we can find our biases is whenever we have an emotional reaction to something. And so getting into the practice of when we do react and we do have some sort of emotional reaction, stopping ourselves and thinking, what's going on inside me and where did that come from? The decolonization work and the internal bias work, I think, is one place to start.
How do you think that, or do you feel about being abused by someone, or not abused, but maybe like rubbed the wrong way? And how do you feel like one should react towards something like that? On a smaller level, smaller scale, like a friendship or whatever, and a larger scale, like you mentioned, colonialism.
Your question is how to react if someone... How do I sit next to him and
How do you internalize and express yourself in a positive way when someone rubs you the wrong way, whether it be like the Palestine issue or a friendship or a family member?
Well, I don't know, but I don't even think it's about how you react. I mean, it is about how you react, but the first step, I think, is figuring out what's going on inside you. And then it's figuring out how you react, because what's going on inside you speaks to what experiences have you had, what traumas have you had. But bias is something, for people who have studied bias, is in every one of us. Anybody who's human and has a brain has a bias. Because a bias just means you've been overexposed to a certain group or subgroup or idea and underexposed to another. So when you see something, your mind naturally goes to what you've been exposed to in the past. And so the way to kind of, and we don't know what our biases are until we stop and reflect and think, where did that come from? What have I been exposed to? What have I not? So I think before we even get to the step of then how do I react when someone's done it, is really taking a deeper look internally of how am I reacting internally and why am I feeling that?
I think it's also, just to put the disclaimer out there, like, we also don't want to victim blame, right? Like, our emotions are always signaling us towards a truth. So maybe it's thinking of bias in terms of extreme reactions. But when we feel anger, that is a natural reaction to our boundaries being violated. When we feel sadness, that's a natural reaction to experiencing loss. And there's sort of these, this is a former khutbah that one of our khatibas, Tasneem Noor, gave on the topic of emotions and what each emotion needs. And each emotion is like a signal on your car dashboard telling you something is off. Here's the information and the messenger is the emotion. It's up to you to decide how to respond.
Allah in the Quran talks about look for the signs, and I think emotions are a sign from Allah. If we start to... look for the signs. I mean,
It's repeated throughout the Quran. Look for the signs. Ayah. So the word ayah has been interpreted in many different ways. So sometimes people interpret it as verse. Sometimes it's interpreted as signs, like the signs of God. So it is. It has many meanings. Why don't we end with this question? We have about 10 minutes left. So instead of only focusing on the problems of today, what are your hopes for the future? And I want to tie this into the question about how prayer works, in that I do think it's really important that that we pay attention to the ways that sometimes our attention is being co-opted, and we're being forced to focus on negative things or negative images, and those images replaying in our minds over and over are acting in the way that a curse would work. Where instead we need to be focusing on what we want to see in the world and praying for that vision, that positive vision. So why don't we each share, like, what is a hope that you have for the future? What would that actually look like? What would that feel like? What are things that we can strive towards instead of only focusing on the bad things that are happening and taking that as condemnation of the future? Only God knows what the future holds, right? So would anyone like to share what your hopes are for the future, or what is something that you would love to see happen that maybe doesn't exist right now? Or maybe you'd like to see more of in the future?
Of course, this is large, but I hope to see no one suffer from famine. I hope to see no warring nations. I hope to see no land grabs or taking of resources or disrespect to each other, being the land, people, animals, the air.
What would it look like, though? So instead of saying what you don't want to see, what would it actually look like?
What would this look like?
Yeah.
I think this would look like a great functioning community.
How are people treating each other? How are they, like, walk us through that vision that you see in your mind. Like, what does that actually look like?
This looks like exactly how the people want it to look. I don't think so much what I want to see it look like, but for myself, I would like to see my horses, and I wouldn't want cars. I would just go by my horse, because in my dream world, right, I could go over here and get my milk, because I don't want cows, because they're too big and I don't want this. So I would go down the street to get my milk, and it would be a barter system. And I would ride my horses to the mosque and do my salah and do it at the mosque instead of like at home. Then I would ride to my backyard, to my garden, because I have all my vegetables. And I would walk to my neighbor and give them some vegetables. Right, but this is a fantasy world. But hopefully this is,
that was amazing.
This
okay,
is something that
hold on, Mariah. I'm going to stop you, because as you said, none of us were thinking of that. None of us. Like, you expanded all of our minds in this vivid way where we could see it, and that's powerful. And I really want to encourage us to keep sharing our visions and our hopes with each other, because you don't know, maybe someone else has access to one of these elements, and together, and you're talking about a barter system, these are ideas that if you don't share them, you're not putting it in anyone's minds, and all we're putting in each other's minds are the negative things that are doom scrolling on social media, right? So really, that was amazing. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but around the circle, we were all like kind of coming to life. Like, this is amazing. That sounds amazing.
This is definitely possible, inshallah. This is something that I want to do. I want to finishing my bachelor's and then going on to medical school, inshallah. And then Dr. Weissman in New Jersey, he actually has a farm where he prescribes his vegetables, and that's how he has patients. And he's a lifestyle doctor now. He was emergency medicine to internal medicine. So I hope to do something like this. And I can send you his name, but he's in New Jersey, Dr. Weissman. I don't remember his first name, but it's possible. I don't know of any other physicians in the U.S. that have done this, like created an entire farm, like left the city, left, shift work, and started his own practice doing something like this. So
I very much also love the vision of horses. So I thought that was funny because I share that. I love being around horses and just that image of self-sustainability and being close to food and peace and respect. I really appreciated that.
I wish for a stronger Muslim community here. I feel that, people come for the namaz and then they either know each other or they just disappear. So I constantly think like, how can I contribute to make it a stronger community as an antidote to, all the negativity and all that. And recently we as a family went for Umrah, and I noticed that in Medina, people come by and just give you food and all that, and that helps create this really positive vibes there. So based on that, I've started, buying small things and just taking them from my Friday prayers, and I'm hoping that will just, in my own little way, it will help contribute to a better community. So that is one. And on the other side, I feel there's a lot of fake, wrong, not accurate news and all that. So I think, how can I contribute to NPR or other places that I think which are sources for more balanced kind of reporting, so that they become stronger. Somebody else was talking about how do we use our money for the right things, and I think that's a good way to kind of personally influence things that are too big of an issue, where you cannot take direct action otherwise.
Amazing. Yeah. I love that. You have this vision of a more connected community in Honolulu, and you're taking what you can do, the steps that you can do, which is, sharing food. That's a very concrete step towards that vision. I'm sure that it will pick up and create the community that you desire, inshallah. Anyone else would like to share? What does your hope for the future look like as a goal, something to strive towards or to dream about?
I might have a little bit of a depressing look on this, but I don't think we have any hope in this world. I think we're here for a short time, and as a Christian, I believe that our hope is only in Jesus Christ. And but as we see the things in this world, I think it's there's corruption everywhere that we look, even between within America or within any country. I think there's so much sin and violence. So yeah, I don't think there's much hope in this world, and our hope is in the afterlife with God. And as a Christian, I believe it's with Christ. Yeah, it might be a depressing way of looking at what we see in front of us, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The Islamic view tends to balance both. So we have this concept of the dunya and the akhirah, the temporary life, which is a test, and the akhirah, or the afterlife, which is kind of a misnomer because it's more of the unseen world that we came from and that we're going to return to. And so the Islamic view tends to be, you do the best you can in this life, and when you pray for something, you'll either see it change in a positive way in this world, or maybe something bad will be removed from your path, or you will get what you're hoping for in the afterlife. So it's up to God, essentially, to decide what that result looks like, but it's our duty to work towards the good that we want to see. And the famous hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that even if, and this is, you have to keep in mind, he said this 1400 years ago when people were panicking, oh, we think the end of the world is coming, 1400 years ago. And every single generation of human beings that has ever existed thought that their generation was the last and thought that things were getting bad. But yet humanity keeps going, right? We're not the center of the world. It's much bigger. Humanity is much bigger than any one of us or our limited visions. But what he said when people were panicking and feeling hopeless was, even if the end of the world comes and you're about to plant a seed or a seedling, keep planting the seed. It's not about, oh, is this going to grow up to be a tree or not? No, the seed is in your hand. It's your job to keep planting those hopes.
I just wanted to make a correction. It was Dr. Ron Weiss with Ethos Primary Care. I'm not associated with him or anything. I just saw what he did, and I really liked it. This is my personal journey, something that I hope to do, inshallah.
It's something you've inspired all of us. Now we're all thinking of horses. We all want to go horseback riding now.
No, I was just going to say, Mariah, when you were describing like your vision, and I know I've had this conversation with you, it's just, when you think about when the Prophet ﷺ and all the Sahaba, right, they lived in the most unjust society, right? And there's like and they lived it day to day, right? We have it in our world, like you talked about, we have it, some of us are more removed, and yet the society that they created over the 23 years of prophethood was the exact opposite, right? There was justice, right? There was equality. All of these things that were radical ideas manifested. And like what you were saying is that your vision is the exact opposite of what we see here, but it's so important that as we're reading the Quran that like we talk about those radical visions that we have as reading the Quran. Like what does it unlock and unleash in us, right? And when you think about even like what it means for decolonization, colonization is all about narrowing the scope, and like there's only one possibility, there's only one way of seeing the world, there's only one way to understand it. And decolonization is, breaking those barriers and seeing there's possibilities, there's other ways of knowing, there's other ways of being. And for us to have that response to the Quran, right? Like when the Prophet and the Sahaba, when they got the Quran, it blew their minds. Right? And so like we need to lean into that. Like it needs to blow our minds that we're just like, I need to go out and do this. I need to create this world that you were describing, right? So just to underscore what Hasna is encouraging us is that like we need to talk more about that. Like we need to have that radical imagination and talk about that and act upon it.
Sorry, I think part of that is this call to action that we're constantly going to be striving in this world, right? It's the struggle is constant. So it's like we might not ever get there, because Jannah is like, heaven is like the real peaceful spot, right? That we all hope to get to, inshallah. But it's that constant struggle and striving to live in a world where all those things are possible, inshallah.
It says, O Prophet, God is enough for thee and those of the believers who follow thee. O Prophet, inspire the believers to conquer all fear of death when fighting. This is limited about fighting, but I'll expand in a second. So inspire the believers to conquer all fear of death when fighting, so that if there be 20 of you who are patient in adversity, they might overcome 200. And that if there be 100 of you, they might overcome 1,000 of those who are bent on denying the truth, because they are people who cannot grasp it. And that reminds me, Sakina told me it is Anfal, the spoils, Surah 8. So that was, it made me think of when this idea of, if we think about what are we afraid of in trying to manifest our hopes and our dreams, what is it that we're really afraid of, what's holding us back? And if we didn't fear that, how would we act? Like if we had faith that could actually happen, what would we do differently? And that thought exercise, I think, leads us to act in a different way in the world. And I think to me, that's kind of that purpose of that hadith of, even if the world is ending, plant the seed. Because if you have this this lack of fear of anything other than Allah, you show up radically different in the world.
I appreciated people's reflections as to like sort of the vision of the world that we want to see. I think somebody said that it's sort of like this world is hopeless. And I think that, there's parts like of our tradition that resonate with that, in the sense that the akhirah will everything will be manifest there. And so I think that there is this sort of tension sometimes as to whether Islam came down as sort of a reformist religion to the way that the society was functioning at the time, or if it was revolutionary by nature. And I think that we see some of those tensions nowadays in terms of thinking of like the society that we want to build. And I think somebody made an earlier comment about like how here in the West, we have to sort of we have to make compromises in order to sit at the table. And I think I take a bit of a different approach to that. I don't know that we have to do that in the West. I think there are other ways of looking at promoting change. You know, for instance, there's folks that have more of a revolutionary mindset who believe in overturning the table together and like never, sitting at the table of the oppressors. And so I think there's a lot of different sort of theories around change and whether that ideal society can be achieved. But I think that the visions are really beautiful. I definitely think that it's something to strive for. And like perhaps in that striving, we will achieve that, if that makes sense. Like the striving is the end goal, like the effort and the attempt to come together collectively to build that. And then the other thing I wanted to say was I think I appreciated folks' response to when I raised the verses around deaf, dumb, and blind. And I think that it also aligns with how I understand it, which is like, I think there's another verse in the Quran, I don't know if we've crossed it yet, where Allah says like, it's not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts. And so I think for me, realizing that it's very much a metaphor in terms of we all have hearts that could go blind was helpful.
Thank you all. And all of you are part of a new vision, right? Just like Layla pointed out, there are different modes of creating change. You can change it within the system, or you can just do it, and the people who align with it will join it. So I want to thank all of you for being an important part of the Women's Mosque of America. We're now in almost our 10th year, and it wouldn't be what it is without all of you also sharing in this vision for a worldwide women-led Islamic Renaissance. So thank you for showing up, continuing to show up and to participate. And I look forward to seeing you all next month as we continue reading the Quran. All right, assalamu alaikum.